Montana Territory, 1878. Dust swirled across the lone street of Willow Creek, a settlement clinging to existence between vast prairie and towering mountains. The town stood as a stubborn outpost of civilization where only the resilient survived, and Zane Abernathy had long ago decided that survival meant keeping to himself. At 25, Zane had already seen enough of the frontier's harsh justice to last several lifetimes. The young cowboy dismounted from his dun gelding, his movements fluid despite the weariness of the trail. His lean frame carried the strength of a man who worked from sunup to sundown, his tanned face handsome beneath the shadow of his Stetson. Though only light stubble framed his strong jawline, his eyes held the weathered look of someone who had learned frontier lessons the hard way. "Careful now, Rusty," he murmured to his horse, patting the animal's neck. "Town means trouble. We will not stay longer than necessary." 3 years on the Rocking M Ranch had taught him that a man survived by keeping his head down and his gun oiled. Love was a luxury that got men killed out here. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was something the West exploited without mercy. Zane had witnessed it firsthand when his former boss, old Jim Miller, lost everything protecting his wife from rustlers. The bullet that took Jim had also taken Zane's last shred of romanticism about frontier life. The boardwalk creaked beneath his boots as he made his way toward Harper's General Store. Spring meant cattle drive preparations, and the Rocking M needed supplies before they moved their herd north. He had volunteered for town duty specifically to avoid the new cookmister. Marshall had hired supposedly some Eastern woman who would bring civilization to their outfit. The last thing Zane needed was some delicate flower disrupting the ranch with impractical notions. What he wanted was simple: earn enough to buy his own small spread someday where he answered to no one. Independence, that was the only dream worth having. The store bell jangled as he pushed through the door, the familiar smell of coffee, leather, and dried goods greeting him. But something else filled the space, the faint scent of lavender. Harper's wife had died 2 winters ago of consumption, so the pleasant aroma seemed out of place. "Be right with you," called a distinctly female voice from behind a stack of newly arrived crates. Zane froze, hat in hand. No woman had worked Harper's store before. She appeared from behind the merchandise, arms full of tinned goods, and Zane felt something peculiar happen to the rhythm of his heartbeat. She couldn't have been more than 22, with honey blonde hair pulled back from a face that belonged in an oil painting, not a dusty frontier outpost. Her simple blue calico dress complemented eyes the color of a summer sky. When those eyes met his, they didn't drop demurely as frontier etiquette dictated. They assessed him frankly. "Good afternoon," she said, placing the tins on the counter. "You must be from one of the nearby ranches." Her accent carried the refined edges of the East, but lacked the condescension he'd come to expect from such voices. "Rocking M," he replied, suddenly aware of his trail dust and the patch on his worn shirt sleeve. "Zane Abernathy. I need to place an order for the spring drive." "Eliza Kearney," she responded with a smile that transformed her from merely beautiful to something that made Zane's chest tighten. "Mr. Harper is my uncle. I arrived from Boston last month to help while his arthritis troubles him." Boston, about as far from Montana Territory as one could get and still remain in the country. She might as well have said she was from the moon. "I have the list here," he managed, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and Zane withdrew his hand too quickly. "This is quite extensive," she noted, studying the paper. "I will need to check our inventory. Would you prefer to wait or return tomorrow?" "Uncle is at the doctor's office in Billings and will not be back until next week." The practical thing would be to ride back to the ranch and return another day when Harper himself was minding the store. Being alone with a woman like her was unsettling in ways Zane couldn't quite name. "I will wait," he heard himself say. "Mr. Marshall needs that order filled soon." She nodded and began moving about the store with surprising efficiency, gathering items and making notations. Nothing in her movements suggested the helplessness he expected from an Eastern woman. As she worked, she asked questions about the cattle drive, intelligent questions about routes and timing that caught him off guard. "You seem to know something about ranching," he observed. "My father was a businessman," she explained, reaching for a tin of coffee on a high shelf, "but he invested in cattle operations in Kansas before the war." I grew up reading his correspondence and ledgers. She gave him a sidelong glance. Women can understand numbers in business as well as men, Mr. Abernathy. I never suggested otherwise, Miss Kearney. Your expression did, she replied with a small smile that carried no accusation, only amusement. For the first time in years, Zane felt his face grow warm. This woman saw too much. Their conversation continued as she assembled the order, and Zane found himself talking more than he had in months. She told him of Boston, of her father's death that had left her with few options beyond accepting her uncle's invitation west. She spoke without self-pity, only a clear-eyed assessment of her circumstances. "And what brought you to ranching, Mr. Abernathy?" she asked, weighing coffee beans. The question brushed too close to memories he kept buried. "Work is work," he answered shortly. "A man needs to eat." "Indeed," she replied, seemingly unperturbed by his brusqueness, "but most men choose their work for reasons beyond sustenance. You strike me as someone who could have done many things." Before he could formulate a response, the door burst open. 3 men entered, rough-looking cowboys from the Bar T, a ranch whose hands were known for trouble. Their leader, a surly man named Cord Tucker, swaggered to the counter. "Well, well," Tucker drawled, his gaze fixing predatorily on Eliza. "Harper finally got himself some proper decoration for this dump." Zane saw Eliza stiffen slightly, though her expression remained composed. "Gentlemen," she acknowledged coolly, "how may I assist you?" Tucker leaned on the counter too close to her. "Oh, I can think of several ways, darling," starting with a smile for lonely men just back from the range. "I believe Miss Kearney asked what merchandise you need," Zane said, his voice level but carrying an edge that drew Tucker's attention. "Look here, boys," Tucker sneered. "A rocking M rider playing gentleman. What business is it of yours how I talk to the lady?" "This lady is serving me," Zane replied. "Once my transaction is complete, the store is all yours." Tucker straightened, his hand drifting toward his holster. "Maybe I do not feel like waiting, cowboy." The air in the store thickened with tension. Zane hadn't drawn his gun on a man in 2 years, not since the incident that still haunted his dreams. But for reasons he couldn't articulate, the thought of this woman being harassed stirred something dangerous in him. Before the situation could escalate further, Eliza stepped between them. "Mr. Tucker, I have just received a shipment of that Kentucky bourbon your foreman prefers. Since you gentlemen have ridden so far, perhaps you would like a sample while I complete Mr. Abernathy's order." Her voice was firm but conciliatory, diffusing the tension with practiced diplomacy. The mention of bourbon caught Tucker's interest. After a tense moment, he backed down with a chuckle. "Well now, that is hospitality worth waiting for." As Eliza poured small measures of amber liquid for the Bar T men, she caught Zane's eye with a look of gratitude. In that moment, something shifted between them, an unspoken alliance in the face of frontier crudeness. By the time Zane's order was ready, the Bar T men were occupied with their drinks and talk of a poker game at the saloon. Eliza had managed the situation with a poise that impressed him deeply. As he prepared to leave, she walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said quietly, "though I could have handled them." "I have no doubt," he replied, finding he meant it, "but a man ought to step in regardless." "A good man, perhaps," her blue eyes studied him with unsettling perception. "Which I suspect you are, despite your efforts to appear otherwise." The observation caught him off guard. "You do not know me, Miss Kearney." "Not yet," she agreed, with a smile that would occupy his thoughts for days to come. "Your supplies will be ready for pickup tomorrow afternoon, Mr. Abernathy." As Zane rode back to the rocking M that evening, the setting sun painting the mountains in fiery gold, he found himself thinking of lavender scent and knowing blue eyes. The encounter had disturbed his carefully maintained equilibrium. The way she had handled those men, neither cowering nor antagonizing, spoke of an inner strength that didn't fit his notion of Eastern women. More troubling still was his own reaction. For 3 years he had avoided entanglements of any kind. Survival on the frontier demanded focus. Attachment was weakness. And yet he found himself looking forward to tomorrow's return to town with an anticipation that made him uneasy. "Foolishness," he muttered to Rusty as they cantered toward the ranch. "She will be gone by autumn, back to her civilized life. Women like her do not stay in places like Willow Creek." But even as he said the words, he knew he would be counting the hours until tomorrow's return to Harper's General Store. The following weeks brought unseasonably heavy spring rains, turning the prairie into a network of muddy trails and swollen creeks. The Rocking M's cattle drive preparations continued despite the weather, but each supply run to town became a test of horsemanship and patience. Zane volunteered for every trip. He told himself it was because he was the best rider, most capable of navigating the treacherous conditions. The fact that each journey brought him to Harper's store and to Eliza was merely coincidence. Their conversations grew longer with each visit. He learned she had taught at a girls' school in Boston before her father's investments failed, leaving her nearly destitute after his death. There was a quiet dignity in how she spoke of her circumstances that stirred his admiration. "Did you never consider marriage as an alternative to coming west?" he asked one rainy afternoon as they sat by the store's pot-bellied stove, waiting for the worst of the downpour to pass. "Oh, there was a suitable candidate," she admitted, her fingers busy mending a tear in a mail sack. "The son of my father's business partner. It would have been a convenient arrangement for all concerned. Yet you chose the frontier instead." Her needle paused. "I chose not to marry a man I did not love for financial security. The frontier was simply where opportunity presented itself." She looked up at him. "Would you marry for convenience, Mr. Abernathy?" "Marriage has never been among my considerations," he answered truthfully, "because of the danger of your work." He hesitated. No one in Willow Creek knew of the events that had driven him west. "The frontier is no place for families. A man alone can move on when necessary, take risks when needed. Responsibilities to others are complications. Yet most of the ranchers here have wives, children. And they live with the fear of leaving those families unprotected in a lawless land." Eliza studied him with those perceptive eyes. "So you forego connection to avoid potential loss. That seems a lonely calculation." Her words struck too close to the truth. "Pragmatic," he corrected. "Not all of us were raised with Boston sensibilities about romance, Miss Kearney." If his tone was sharper than intended, she showed no offense. "Perhaps not, but I suspect loneliness feels the same in Boston as it does in Montana." The rain hammered on the roof, filling the silence between them. "Tell me about the cattle drive," she finally said, changing the subject. "Where will you take the herd?" Grateful for the shift in conversation, Zane explained the route to Cheyenne, the challenges of moving 2,000 cattle across rivers and open country. To his surprise, she asked intelligent questions about creek crossings and grazing. "You seem unusually knowledgeable about such matters," he observed. "I read," she replied simply, "and I listen, your Mr. Marshall came in yesterday discussing concerns about the crossing at Wolf Creek." "The man talks too much," Zane muttered. "He mentioned you would be trail boss this year." Zane nodded. "With Peterson laid up from that fall, I was the logical choice. He spoke highly of your abilities, said there wasn't a better horseman or more level-headed cowboy in 3 territories." Something in her tone made him look up sharply. Was she teasing him? But her expression held only sincere interest. "Marshall exaggerates," he said uncomfortably. "I doubt that." Her needle resumed its rhythmic movement through fabric. "When do you leave?" 2 weeks if the weather improves." "And how long will you be gone?" 6 weeks, perhaps longer if we encounter trouble." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Willow Creek will seem quiet without the Rocking M boys coming and going. I doubt you will notice the absence, with your uncle returning next week." "Oh, I will notice," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "Some absences are more significant than others." The rain chose that moment to slacken, and Zane rose quickly, suddenly needing air that wasn't filled with lavender scent and unspoken meanings. "I should return to the ranch before the weather worsens again," he said, reaching for his slicker. At the door he paused. The proper thing would be to bid her good day and leave, maintaining the distance that safety required. Instead, he heard himself say, "There is a social at the Grange Hall Saturday next. Music, dancing, most of the county attends." "Yes, Uncle mentioned it in his letter. He thought I might enjoy meeting more of the townsfolk." Zane shifted his weight, hat in hand. "Would you, that is, might you permit me to escort you, for propriety's sake, as your uncle is still away?" The smile that illuminated her face sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. For propriety's sake, she agreed, her eyes betraying a hint of mischief, I would be honored, Mr. Abernathy. As he rode back through the diminishing rain, Zane could not quite make sense of the lightness he felt. A social meant nothing, merely a neighborly gesture toward a newcomer. That he had never attended one before, despite 3 years in the territory, was immaterial. Yet as the rocking M came into view, he found himself wondering if his one good shirt could be mended in time, and whether the bunkhouse possessed an iron for the occasion. The Willow Creek Grange Hall glowed with lantern light against the deepening twilight. Fiddle music spilled through its open doors, accompanied by the sounds of laughter and boot heels on wooden floors. Wagons and saddle horses crowded the hitching rails outside. Zane had spent an unprecedented amount of time on his appearance. His dark blue shirt had been washed, mended, and pressed with borrowed equipment from the ranch house. His boots were polished, his usually unruly brown hair tamed as much as possible. He had even submitted to a proper shave at the barber's in town that afternoon. When he arrived at Harper's store, where Eliza was staying in the family quarters upstairs, his carefully rehearsed greeting deserted him entirely. She wore a dress of deep green, simpler than Boston fashion perhaps, but elegant in a way that made the other women of Willow Creek seem drab by comparison. Her honey blonde hair was arranged in a style that framed her face with soft curls. When she smiled at his stunned expression, Zane forgot every frontier lesson about keeping his guard up. "You look," he began, searching for appropriate words. "Presentable," she offered with a teasing lilt. "Adequate for a frontier social." "Beautiful," he said honestly, "far too beautiful for Willow Creek." A becoming flush colored her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy, you look quite handsome yourself." They walked the short distance to the Grange Hall, the spring evening mild and fragrant with wildflowers. Zane was acutely aware of her presence beside him, of the occasional brush of her skirts against his legs, of the way passing cowboys and townspeople regarded them with curious looks. At the entrance to the hall, he hesitated. Social gatherings had never been his forte, and this one seemed particularly daunting with Eliza at his side. What if she found his company lacking compared to the more sociable ranchers? What if he stepped on her toes during a dance? What if... "Shall we go in?" she asked, seeming to sense his unease. "I promise not to abandon you to Mrs. Wilkins and her 3 unmarried daughters." The reference to the town's most notorious matchmaker startled a laugh from him. "You have met Mrs. Wilkins already. She visited the store twice this week to inform me of her girls' many domestic virtues. Apparently, Dorothea makes exceptional preserves." "A vital skill in securing matrimony," Zane agreed solemnly, finding his nervousness easing at her humor. "Indeed. Though I suspect your requirements might extend beyond jam-making abilities." "At the moment, my only requirement is a dance partner who will forgive my rusty steps," he said, offering his arm with newfound confidence. "Shall we?" The social was in full swing as they entered. The hall had been transformed with spring wildflowers and paper decorations. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small band played energetic tunes at the far end. Couples twirled on the makeshift dance floor, their movements ranging from graceful to enthusiastic. Eliza's arrival created a stir, particularly among the town's bachelor population. Zane found himself the recipient of envious glances and puzzled looks. The consensus around Willow Creek had long been that Zane Abernathy was married to his work, immune to feminine charms. His appearance with the beautiful newcomer challenged that established wisdom. Mrs. Wilkins descended upon them immediately, her 3 daughters in tow. "Miss Kearney, how delightful you could join us," she exclaimed, while giving Zane a speculative look. "And Mr. Abernathy, what a surprise. I do not believe I have seen you at a social before." "First time for everything, Mrs. Wilkins," he replied politely. "Indeed, Miss Kearney, you must meet everyone. Zane, you would not mind if I introduce our guest around? Dorothea can keep you company." Before either could respond, the fiddles struck up a lively reel and Zane seized the opportunity. "Perhaps later, Mrs. Wilkins. I believe I promised Miss Kearney the first dance." He turned to Eliza. "Shall we?" Her grateful smile was all the answer he needed. As he led her to the dance floor, she murmured, "My hero." Despite his concerns, Zane found that dancing returned to him naturally. His mother had insisted on teaching him proper steps in his youth before the hardships that drove their family west. With Eliza in his arms, moving to the music seemed as intuitive as riding. The evening passed in a blur of dances, conversations, and shared laughter. Eliza charmed everyone she met, from crusty old ranchers to shy ranch wives, yet she never strayed from Zane's side for long, returning to him with a look that made him feel like the most fortunate man in the territory. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for air. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Montana sky. The sounds of the social faded behind them as they walked a short distance to a bench beneath an old cottonwood. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Eliza asked as they sat. "You seemed reluctant at first." "I was," he admitted. "Gatherings have not been my preference these past years, but tonight has been unexpectedly pleasant." "Because of the excellent punch," she teased. "Because of the company," he replied honestly. Their eyes met in the moonlight, and Zane felt something shift between them, a boundary crossing neither had planned. The proper course would be to maintain distance, to remember that she was Boston and he was frontier, that she would eventually return east and he would remain. That attachment meant vulnerability. Instead, he found himself saying, "I leave for the cattle drive in 10 days. "I know," she said softly. "When I return, would you permit me to call on you, properly, I mean?" The question hung in the night air between them. Eliza studied his face, her expression unreadable in the silvery light. "I would like that very much," she finally answered, "though I wonder what changed your mind about attachments being complications." The question deserved honesty. "I have not changed my mind. They are complications, dangerous ones." He looked out at the star-filled sky. "But tonight I find myself thinking that some complications might be worth the risk." Her hand found his in the darkness, small and warm, a very cowboy way of looking at it. "Calculated risk." "Not calculated at all," he admitted, "which terrifies me more than I can say." She laughed softly. "Zane Abernathy afraid, I find that hard to believe." "You would be surprised at what frightens me, Eliza Kearney." From inside came the opening notes of a waltz. Zane stood and offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" As they moved back toward the glow of the hall, Eliza paused, looking up at him with an expression that caught his breath. "For the record," she said quietly, "I find uncalculated risks much more interesting than safe choices. Otherwise, I would be married to a Boston banker instead of dancing under Montana stars with a cowboy." The cattle drive preparations intensified in the days following the social. Zane found himself torn between ranch responsibilities and a growing desire to spend every possible moment in town. He invented reasons to visit Willow Creek, additional supplies needed, messages to deliver, questions about the last order. Each time he found his way to Harper's store, where Eliza greeted him with a smile that made the hard ride worthwhile. Harper had returned from Billings, his arthritis somewhat improved but still troubling him enough that Eliza's presence remained necessary. The old storekeeper watched their growing attachment with an expression that mingled approval and concern. "My niece has taken quite a shine to you, Abernathy," he commented one afternoon while Eliza was upstairs. "Not that I can blame her. You are one of the few men around here with all your teeth and the sense God gave a mule." "Your niece is a remarkable woman, Mr. Harper." "That she is. Too good for this dusty corner of nowhere." The old man fixed him with a penetrating look. "She deserves better than hardship and heartbreak." The words struck uncomfortably close to Zane's own doubts. "I would never intentionally bring her either." "Intentions matter less than realities out here," Harper sighed. "Just remember she has options back east. Do not bind her to a life she might come to regret." Before Zane could respond, Eliza returned and the conversation shifted to safer topics, but Harper's warning lingered like a shadow. Zane had been telling himself that his growing feelings for Eliza were harmless, a bright spot before the long separation of the cattle drive. Harper's words forced him to confront the selfishness of his attachment. What future could he offer her? A cowboy's life was uncertain, dangerous. Even if he saved enough for his own small spread someday, it would be nothing compared to the comforts of Boston. These thoughts preoccupied him as they walked along Willow Creek the next evening. He had asked if she might accompany him after closing the store, ostensibly to show her the beaver dam upstream. In truth, he simply wanted to be alone with her before his departure in 3 days. The creek burbled peacefully beside them as they followed its winding path away from town. Spring wildflowers dotted the banks, and cottonwoods provided dappled shade against the late afternoon sun. "You are unusually quiet today," Eliza observed as they paused to watch a family of ducks paddle downstream. "Just thinking about the drive ahead," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "Is that all?" Her perception was unsettling. Zane picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. "Your uncle worries about your attachment to Willow Creek, to me." "Uncle worries about everything. It is his nature. His concerns are not unfounded." She turned to face him fully. "And what exactly are his concerns, as you understand them?" Put on the spot, Zane struggled to articulate what had been turning in his mind. "That you might feel obligated to stay in a place far below what you deserve. That frontier life is harder than you realize." "I see," her voice cooled noticeably. "And naturally, as a fragile Eastern woman, I could not possibly understand the challenges or make informed decisions about my own future." "That is not what I meant." "Isn't it?" She folded her arms. "Zane, in the short time I have been here, I have handled drunken cowboys, balanced uncle's accounts that were months in disarray, repaired a leaking roof, and negotiated better terms with 3 different suppliers. Do I strike you as someone incapable of assessing difficulties?" Put that way, it made his concerns sound patronizing. "No," he admitted, "you have proven remarkably capable." "Then perhaps the issue is not my ability to handle frontier life, but your willingness to believe I might choose it." The insight was uncomfortable in its accuracy. Before he could respond, hoofbeats sounded on the trail behind them. They turned to see a rider approaching at speed, his horse lathered from hard riding. Zane recognized Ben Cooper, one of the younger Rocking M hands. The boy reined in sharply when he spotted them. "Mr. Abernathy," he called, his young face flushed with exertion, "been looking all over for you. Marshall sent me to fetch you back right away." "What has happened?" Zane stepped forward, alarm prickling his spine. "Raiders hit the north pasture," Cooper panted. "Ran off 30 head and shot Jenkins when he tried to stop them. Doc's with him now, but it looks bad." The news hit like a physical blow. Jenkins was barely 18, a good kid learning the ropes. Who were they? Nobody recognized them proper, 4 men, masked, but Jenkins said something before he passed out, said one had a silver conchose on his gun belt. "Marshall thinks it might be the Hardin gang from up Wyoming way." Zane's blood ran cold. The Hardins were notorious raiders, known for violence and ruthlessness. If they had moved into Rocking M territory, every ranch in the valley was at risk. "I will come immediately," he told Cooper. Turning to Eliza, he added, "I must go." The concern in her eyes matched his own. "Of course. Go safely." He wanted to say more, to apologize for their interrupted conversation, to promise he would return before the drive, but duty pressed. With a nod that conveyed more than words could, he swung up behind Cooper and they galloped back toward town. The next 3 days passed in a blur of tracking, planning, and preparation. The stolen cattle had been driven hard north toward the Missouri Breaks, rugged country where outlaws could easily disappear. Marshall assembled a posse of ranch hands and concerned neighbors, with Zane in the lead due to his tracking skills. They recovered most of the cattle, scattered but alive, near an abandoned line shack 2 days' ride from the ranch. Of the raiders there was no sign, though tracks suggested they had split up after abandoning the herd, a common tactic when pursued. Jenkins survived his wound, though the doctor warned he would not be fit for the cattle drive. His description of the raiders yielded little beyond confirming that at least one was likely part of the Hardin gang based on the distinctive silver conchose. By the time Zane returned to the Rocking M, the cattle drive departure was upon them. There was no opportunity to ride into Willow Creek, no chance to see Eliza before the long journey to Cheyenne. The best he could do was pen a hasty note explaining the circumstances, which he entrusted to Marshall to deliver when he went to town for final supplies. As the massive herd began moving south with the dawn, Zane found himself looking back toward Willow Creek, visible only as a smudge of smoke against the mountains. For the first time, leaving felt like tearing rather than release. He thought of Eliza's words by the creek, her assertion that she was stronger than he credited, her suggestion that the real issue was his own fear. She had seen through him with unsettling accuracy. It wasn't her ability to endure frontier life he doubted, it was his worthiness to offer it to her. The cattle drive proved more challenging than any in Zane's experience. Unseasonable storms swelled rivers to dangerous levels, forcing detours that added days to their journey. A case of hoof rot threatened to spread through the herd until they discovered a natural sulfur spring that helped treat the affected animals. Worse, rumors of the Hardin gang followed them south. At a trading post near the Wyoming border, they heard that raiders matching their description had hit 2 other ranches since the Rocking M incident. "They are getting bolder," warned the grizzled store owner. "Last place they hit, they burned the ranch house with the family inside. Only the youngest boy escaped to tell the tale." The news sent a chill through Zane. The Rocking M was well defended, but Harper's store and Eliza would be vulnerable if such men turned their attention to town businesses. That night, as the crew sat around the campfire, Marshall noticed Zane's preoccupation. "Something eating at you, boy?" the ranch foreman asked, settling beside him with a cup of coffee. "Just thinking about those raiders," Zane replied, not entirely truthfully. Marshall studied him with knowing eyes. "And about a certain storekeeper's niece, I would wager. Miss Kearney has made quite an impression on you." There seemed little point in denial. "She is unlike anyone I have ever met. Harper tells me she has turned down 2 marriage proposals since arriving. Seems she has particular standards." The information startled Zane. Proposals from whom? Bank manager Tolliver for one, and young Dr. Wilson. Marshall grinned at Zane's expression. "Beautiful, educated women do not stay unattached long on the frontier, son, even ones who seem partial to certain cowboys." The thought of Eliza receiving proposals and refusing them stirred a complex mix of emotions. Relief that she had declined, fear that others would continue to pursue her, and uncertainty about his own place in her considerations. "Did Harper say why she refused them?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Marshall's laugh suggested he failed. "No, but I have my suspicions. Neither man was tall, brown-haired, and partial to that done gelding of yours." Before Zane could respond, shouts erupted from the night guard. A section of the herd had been spooked by something, wolves, perhaps, or mountain lions, and were threatening to stampede. The conversation ended as both men raced to calm the cattle before disaster struck. The incident proved minor, but it underscored the constant vigilance the trail required. In the days that followed, Zane threw himself into his responsibilities, pushing thoughts of Eliza to the back of his mind. The drive demanded his full attention, and dwelling on a woman hundreds of miles away was an indulgence he could not afford. Yet in quiet moments, when the herd was settled and the night stretching before him, her face returned to his thoughts with painful clarity. He wondered what she was doing, whether she read in the evenings as she had mentioned, if she missed their conversations as he did. Most of all, he wondered if she would still be in Willow Creek when he returned, or if the limitations of frontier life and his own inability to offer more would drive her back to the civilization she deserved. 3 weeks into the drive, they reached the outskirts of Cheyenne. The journey had taken longer than expected due to the detours, but the herd was healthy and complete, a success by any measure. Marshall negotiated a good price with the buyers, and the crew celebrated in town before preparing for the return journey. It was in Cheyenne's telegraph office, sending confirmation of the sale to the ranch owner, that Zane received news that turned his world upside down. "You Abernathy, from Willow Creek?" asked the telegraph operator. Zane nodded. "Got a message came in for the Rocking M 3 days ago. Been holding it in case any of your outfit showed up." The man handed over a yellow slip of paper. The message was brief and devastating. "RAIDERS hit Willow Creek, stop Harper store, burn, stop Harper, injured, stop Miss Kearney, taken, stop sheriff, organizing search, stop return, urgently, stop Marshall." The paper crumpled in Zane's fist as cold horror washed through him. Eliza taken, the words echoed like physical blows. The Hardin gang was known for many atrocities, but taking women was among the worst. The thought of Eliza in their hands unleashed something primal in Zane's chest, a rage so pure it momentarily blinded him. He was running before conscious thought formed, sprinting back to the hotel where Marshall was settling accounts. The foreman took one look at Zane's face and the crumpled telegram and immediately understood. "Take my horse," he ordered without hesitation. "He is fresher than yours. I will arrange for the men to follow as they can, but do not wait. Every hour matters." The return journey became a blur of exhaustion and determination. Zane rode as he never had before, changing horses at relay stations when possible, pushing to the edge of endurance when necessary. What had taken weeks with the herd took days on horseback, each mile bringing fresh torment as he imagined Eliza's fear and suffering. The only mercy was that he knew precisely who he was hunting. The silver conchos Jenkins had described belonged to Luke Hardin, the youngest and most vicious of the gang. Zane had encountered him once before, years earlier in a situation he had spent 3 years trying to forget. The memory of that day and what had happened to another woman in Hardin's clutches drove him forward when his body screamed for rest. 4 days of punishing travel brought him within sight of Willow Creek. The town appeared eerily normal from a distance, its buildings silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Only as he drew closer did the damage become apparent. Several structures on the main street showed fire damage, including the charred skeleton of what had been Harper's General Store. He rode directly to the sheriff's office, where a small group of men were gathered around a map spread on a desk. They looked up as he burst through the door, their expressions shifting from surprise to recognition. Sheriff Tanner straightened. "Abernathy. You made good time. We were not expecting the Rocking M boys back for another week at least." "Where is she?" Zane demanded, his voice raw from trail dust and fear. The sheriff exchanged looks with the other men. "We are not certain. The raiders hit 5 days ago, 4 men, masked, matching the description of the Hardin gang. They robbed the bank, shot the teller, then set fire to 3 businesses when people tried to stop them." "And Eliza? Miss Kearney?" "She was in the store when they torched it. Harper says she fought like a wildcat when they grabbed her, took a pistol from under the counter and shot one of them in the arm before they overwhelmed her." Pride mingled with horror in Zane's chest. Of course she had fought. She was far stronger than anyone knew. "We have been tracking them," continued the sheriff, "but lost the trail in the high country yesterday. They are heading toward the Missouri Breaks, near as we can tell." "I know where they are going," Zane said with certainty. "There is an old trapper's cabin in Devil's Canyon. Hardin used it before." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "How would you know that?" "Because I have hunted Luke Hardin before," Zane replied, the admission tearing free from 3 years of silence. "In Kansas, before I came here." The revelation silenced the room. Zane had never spoken of his past to anyone in Willow Creek, had carefully constructed a persona of the quiet, competent cowboy without history or baggage. "You were a lawman?" asked Tanner. "No." "A husband?" The word felt strange on his tongue after so long. "Luke Hardin killed my wife 3 years ago. I tracked him for months, but he escaped into the territories. When I finally cornered him near Hayes, he had friends I had not counted on. I took a bullet and he got away. By the time I recovered, the trail was cold." Understanding dawned in the sheriff's weathered face. "So you came west looking for him?" "I came west to escape what happened," Zane corrected. "I wanted to forget, to be someone else, someone who did not feel anything that could be taken away." He looked around at the stunned faces. "Now he has Eliza and I cannot fail again. I will not." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "Devil's Canyon is rough country. How certain are you about this cabin?" "I have been tracking Hardin for longer than anyone here," Zane replied. "I know how he thinks, where he feels safe. The cabin is 3 days' hard ride north in a box canyon with only one approach, defensible, hidden. He will go there to regroup before crossing into Canada." "Then we ride at dawn," Tanner decided. "I have 7 men, all experienced." "I am leaving now," Zane interrupted. "Alone." Protests erupted from the gathered men, but Zane silenced them with a raised hand. "A group that size will be spotted miles away. 1 man might slip through, and Hardin knows me. He will be expecting revenge, not rescue. That gives me an advantage." "Or it makes you the first one he will shoot," argued the sheriff. "That is a risk I accept." Zane's voice was steel. "Every hour she remains in their hands." He could not finish the thought. The sheriff recognized the immovable determination in Zane's stance. "At least take tonight to rest. Your horse is spent and you look ready to drop." We can provision you properly, give you our best mount. The logic was sound, however much it grated against Zane's need for immediate action. A few hours of preparation might make the difference between success and failure. Until dawn, he conceded reluctantly, no later. As the men dispersed to gather supplies and spread word of the plan, the sheriff pulled Zane aside. "Harper is at Doc Wilson's place," he said quietly. "Burned pretty bad trying to save the store, but conscious. Might be good for you to see him before you go." The doctor's house sat on the edge of town, a tidy white structure with a small sign advertising his services. Wilson himself answered the door, his young face drawn with exhaustion. "Abernathy," he greeted without surprise. "Come in. Harper has been asking for you since he heard you were expected back." The old storekeeper lay in a clean bed, bandages covering his arms and much of his chest. His face was mottled with angry red burns, but his eyes were clear and alert as Zane entered. "Took you long enough," Harper rasped. Zane moved to the bedside, anguish washing through him at the old man's condition. "I came as soon as I heard." "I am so sorry, Mr. Harper." "Not your fault, boy." Harper's damaged hand reached for Zane's. "But you have to find her. Eliza is all the family I have left." "I will," Zane promised. "I know where they are taking her." Harper's grip tightened painfully. "She kept asking for you when things were bad here, said you would know what to do." His voice broke. "I could not protect her." "You did everything possible," Zane assured him, the weight of the old man's grief adding to his own burden of guilt. "Tell me what happened, everything you remember." Harper's account matched what the sheriff had described. The raiders had hit the bank first, then begun systematic destruction when townspeople resisted. Eliza had been closing the store when they burst in, demanding the cash box and supplies. "She gave them the money without argument," Harper said. "Smart girl." But when the leader grabbed her, saying they needed a traveling companion, something changed in her eyes. She reached under the counter for the Remington I keep there and shot him point-blank in the arm. Pride surged in Zane's chest. "That sounds like her." "They beat her unconscious," Harper continued, his voice breaking. "Would have killed her, I think, but the leader stopped them, said she had spirit and he liked that. Then they set the fire and dragged her out. I tried to follow, but—" he gestured at his burns. "You did more than most men would have dared," Zane said firmly. "Now rest. I swear to you I will bring her home." As he turned to leave, Harper called after him, "Abernathy. When you find the men who did this—" He did not need to finish the thought. The implication was clear in his ravaged face. Zane nodded once grimly. Some debts could only be paid in blood. Dawn found him mounted on the sheriff's best horse, a powerful black gelding with renowned endurance. His saddlebags contained provisions for 3 days, ammunition for the Winchester rifle strapped to his saddle and the Colt revolver on his hip, and basic medical supplies for when he found Eliza. When not if he could not permit himself to consider failure. The sheriff and several deputies accompanied him to the edge of town. "We will follow a half-day behind," Tanner said. "Just in case." "Just in case I fail again," Zane thought, but nodded his appreciation. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as he rode north. The Missouri breaks were a maze of steep ravines, twisted cedars, and hidden watercourses, perfect country for outlaws and those wishing to disappear. By the second day, he was navigating game trails so narrow the horse had to pick its way cautiously along cliff edges. He pushed as hard as he dared, knowing that haste which led to a lamed horse or broken leg would doom Eliza more surely than caution. At night he permitted himself only brief stops, dozing upright with his back against a tree, rifle across his lap. During these moments of stillness, unwelcome memories surfaced. Sarah, his young wife, her body broken by Hardin's cruelty. The months of pursuit that had consumed him after her death, transforming him from a young Kansas farmer into a hollow shell fueled only by vengeance. The final confrontation that had left him bleeding in the dirt while Hardin escaped. For 3 years, he had buried these memories beneath quiet competence and isolation. Now they returned with searing clarity, along with the guilt of having opened his heart to Eliza while concealing his past. Would she hate him for the deception when, if he found her? Would she blame him for bringing Hardin's violence into her life through some cosmic retribution? These thoughts tormented him as he pushed deeper into the wilderness. By the 3rd day, he recognized landmarks from his previous hunt, a distinctive rock formation like a giant's hand, a lightning-blasted pine that served as a marker. Devil's Canyon lay just beyond, accessible only through a narrow gap between towering cliffs. He left the horse concealed in a thicket with access to water, continuing on foot with rifle in hand. The approach to the canyon would be watched. His only hope was stealth. The sun was low, casting long shadows as he worked his way through the rocky terrain toward the canyon entrance. There, just visible against the deepening gloom, was the wisp of smoke he had anticipated. The cabin was occupied. Zane settled behind a boulder to study the situation. The cabin stood in a small clearing, its back to the canyon wall. A crude corral held several horses, confirming multiple occupants. No guards were visible, but that meant little in this defensive position. Anyone approaching across the open ground would be exposed to fire from the cabin's windows. As darkness fell, lights appeared inside the structure. Through his field glass, Zane could make out movement, at least 3 distinct figures passing before the windows. Of Eliza there was no sign, but she would likely be kept restrained away from doors or windows. Patience had never been more difficult, but rushing in would mean death. He forced himself to wait as full night descended, bringing with it the concealment he needed. The moon was a silver crescent, providing just enough light to navigate by as he worked his way around the perimeter of the canyon. His plan was to approach from above, using the cliff behind the cabin. It was a risky climb in darkness, but it offered the element of surprise that might make the difference. The ascent was grueling, each handhold tested carefully before trusting his weight to it. Loose rocks threatened to betray his presence with noise. Twice he nearly fell when handholds crumbled, catching himself just in time. Finally, he reached a ledge above and behind the cabin. From this vantage, he could see the entire clearing and the cabin's rear wall with its single window. The structure was log and sod, built to withstand winter. A root cellar door was visible at the base of the wall below him, a potential entry point if he could reach it unseen. Movement by the corral caught his eye. A man emerged from the shadows, rifle casually held as he circled the horses. A guard then. Zane watched his pattern, noting that he completed a circuit every 15 minutes or so, approaching the cabin's rear briefly before returning to the corral. Inside, voices rose occasionally, men laughing, the clink of bottles. They felt secure in their remote hideout, confident that pursuit was far behind. During the guard's next circuit, Zane made his move. He descended swiftly and silently, timing his approach to reach the root cellar door during the guard's furthest point from the cabin. The door was secured with a simple latch which yielded to his knife blade without resistance. The cellar was pitch dark and smelled of earth and potatoes. Zane eased himself inside, closing the door silently behind him. Above, floorboards creaked with movement. Voices filtered down, men arguing over cards. From the sound of it, a faint whimpering sound froze him in place. It came from the darkest corner of the cellar. "Who is there?" whispered a voice he would have recognized anywhere, though it was ragged with fear and exhaustion. "Eliza," he breathed, moving carefully toward the sound. "It is Zane." A sharp intake of breath, then, "Zane. Is it really you?" He found her huddled against the wall, wrists bound with rope, a chain securing her ankle to a support post. Even in the near darkness, he could see the bruising on her face, the torn condition of her dress. Rage threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced it down. Getting her safely away was all that mattered. "I am here," he whispered, touching her cheek gently. "I am going to get you out." She leaned into his touch, a sob escaping her. "You came for me, I knew you would." "Always," he promised, the magnitude of that commitment settling into his bones as he said it. He used his knife to cut her bonds, working quickly but carefully in the dark. "Can you walk?" "Yes." They have not," she could not finish, but he understood what she was trying to tell him. The relief was profound. "Hardin wanted to wait until they crossed into Canada," she continued, her voice steadying. "He said that would be his wedding night." The others argued with him about it. The familiar cold hatred surged through Zane at the thought of Hardin's intentions. How many men? 4, including Hardin. "One is injured. I shot him during the raid." A note of fierce satisfaction entered her voice. "He cannot use his right arm." "Good girl," Zane murmured, pride momentarily displacing rage. With her bonds cut, he helped her to her feet. She swayed against him, weak from days of captivity and poor treatment, but determined. "We need to get you out through the cellar door," he whispered. I have a horse waiting half a mile back. Can you make it that far? She nodded against his shoulder. Just get me away from here. The cellar door eased open under Zane's hand. The guard was just visible at the far side of the clearing, back turned. This was their chance. Stay close to me, he instructed. Move exactly as I do. They slipped out into the night, keeping the cabin between themselves and the guard as they edged toward the cover of boulders at the canyon's edge, 20 yards to safety. 15:10, the cabin door banged open, spilling lamplight across the clearing. Luke Hardin himself stood framed in the doorway, instantly recognizable despite the years since Zane had seen him. He was calling to the guard something about checking on the prisoner. Zane froze, pulling Eliza against him in the shadow of a pine. Discovery seemed inevitable as the guard turned toward the cellar. Any moment now, the alarm would sound. Then Hardin's next words carried clearly across the night air. Abernathy is out there somewhere. I can feel it. The fool thinks he can hunt me again. The guard laughed. Man must have a death wish. You put him down once already. Not permanently enough, Hardin replied. This time I will make sure of it. Double the watch tonight. The two men moved toward the cellar, their discovery of Eliza's escape moments away. Zane made an instant decision. He would never get Eliza to safety with an immediate pursuit. He had to buy time. Run for those rocks, he whispered, pointing to a cluster of boulders 30 yards away. Keep going until you reach the horse. Head south. The sheriff and his men are coming up from Willow Creek. You should meet them by morning. What about you? Fear made her clutch his arm. I will catch up, he lied, knowing she would never leave otherwise. I need to delay them. Before she could protest, he stepped away from the tree's cover, rifle raised. Hardin, he called, his voice carrying across the clearing. The outlaw leader whirled, disbelief crossing his face as he recognized the figure standing openly in the moonlight. Abernathy, he breathed, then laughed harshly. Still chasing ghosts, I see. Not ghosts, Zane replied, noting with satisfaction that Eliza was using his distraction to move toward the boulders. Just justice, long overdue. You failed to deliver it in Kansas, Hardin sneered, his hand drifting toward his holster. What makes you think Montana will be different? Because this time, Zane said coldly, I have nothing left to lose. The night erupted in gunfire. Zane's first shot caught the guard square in the chest, dropping him instantly. His second missed Hardin as the outlaw dove for cover behind a water trough. From inside the cabin, the remaining gang members were scrambling for weapons. Zane used the momentary chaos to retreat toward a defensive position among the rocks opposite from where Eliza was escaping. Bullets kicked up dirt around him as he ran, but he reached cover unscathed. A firefight ensued, with Zane methodically targeting muzzle flashes in the darkness. He heard a cry as one of his shots found a mark, reducing the odds slightly. His primary goal was to keep their attention fixed on him while Eliza escaped. Each minute he held them here was another 100 yards she could put between herself and danger. Hardin's voice carried from behind the trough. Give it up, Abernathy. You are outnumbered and surrounded. Throw down your weapon and I will make it quick. Like you did for my wife. Zane called back, changing position after firing to avoid giving away his location. No thanks, I think I will take a few more of you with me first. The girl is gone, Hardin shouted, anger replacing confidence. I will hunt her down after I finish you. She will pay for what you are doing here tonight. The threat sent a fresh surge of determination through Zane. He had to ensure Hardin never left this canyon. The gunfight continued, a deadly dance of flash and thunder in the mountain night. Zane's ammunition would not last indefinitely, but neither would Hardin's patience. Eventually, the outlaw would attempt to rush his position or flee. That moment came sooner than expected. A horse's frightened whinny cut through the gunfire, followed by the sounds of the animals breaking from their corral. Someone was attempting escape under cover of the confusion. Two figures darted from the cabin toward the fleeing horses. Zane drew careful aim on the first, squeezing the trigger. The man stumbled and fell. The second reached a horse and swung up, spurring desperately toward the canyon entrance. Hardin himself remained behind the trough, providing covering fire for his escaping companion. Zane could not take aim at the fleeing rider without exposing himself to Hardin's gun. A moment's calculation, and he made his choice. The escaping man might raise an alarm somewhere, but Hardin was the true threat to Eliza. Zane turned his full attention to the outlaw leader. "Just you and me now, Hardin," he called. "Your friends have deserted you." "One got away," Hardin returned confidently. "He will bring back the rest of our outfit. You are a dead man, Abernathy." "Then I have nothing to lose by finishing what I started in Kansas." Silence followed this declaration. Zane used it to edge closer, moving from boulder to boulder with minimal sound. Hardin's position was strong but fixed. He had nowhere to go without crossing open ground. The standoff continued for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes. Zane's patience was rewarded when Hardin finally spoke again, his voice coming from a slightly different position. He was trying to maneuver for a better angle. "That woman means something to you, does not she?" Hardin called. "Just like the pretty little wife in Kansas. You never learn, Abernathy. Caring for people is what gets them killed out here." The taunt was meant to provoke rash action, but Zane had learned control in the hardest possible school. He did not respond, instead using the sound of Hardin's voice to pinpoint his new location. "I will find her," Hardin continued when no response came, "and when I do, I will make sure she knows exactly who to blame for what happens next." Zane had worked his way to within 15 yards of the water trough. From this angle he could see Hardin's shadow as the outlaw crouched behind his cover. One clear shot was all he needed. He steadied his breathing, focusing as he had been taught long ago. The rifle settled against his shoulder, its weight familiar and reassuring. He sighted carefully along the barrel. A twig snapped beneath his boot. Hardin spun toward the sound, firing blindly. The bullet whined past Zane's ear as he squeezed his own trigger. The report echoed off the canyon walls, momentarily deafening him. When his ears cleared, silence had fallen. No return fire came from the water trough. Cautiously, rifle trained on Hardin's position, Zane advanced. The outlaw lay sprawled beside the trough, a dark stain spreading across his chest. His eyes were open, fixed on Zane as he approached. "You got me fair," Hardin gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Better than last time." Zane stood over him, rifle still aimed. Part of him had imagined this moment for 3 years, standing over the man who had destroyed his life, watching the light fade from his eyes. He had expected satisfaction, even triumph. Instead, he felt only a weary emptiness. Sarah was still gone, nothing would bring her back, but perhaps now she could rest easier and Eliza would be safe. "Is she worth it?" Hardin wheezed, his voice growing fainter. "Your new woman. Worth dying for like the last one." Zane thought of Eliza's strength, her laughter, the way she saw through his carefully constructed walls to the wounded man beneath. "Yes," he said simply. "She is worth everything." Hardin's laugh turned into a wet cough. "Then I hope you do better protecting this one." The outlaw's eyes glazed over, his final breath rattling in his chest. Luke Hardin, who had brought so much suffering, was gone. Zane stood motionless, the culmination of 3 years' unacknowledged quest leaving him strangely adrift. Then urgency reasserted itself. Eliza was out there alone, and one gang member had escaped. After confirming that the remaining outlaws were dead, he retrieved his horse and set off in the direction Eliza would have taken. The trail was difficult to follow in darkness, but he tracked as best he could, pushing south toward where the sheriff's posse should be approaching. Dawn was breaking when he spotted movement on the trail ahead, multiple riders moving cautiously north. Relief flooded through him as he recognized Sheriff Tanner at the lead. And beside him, mounted on a deputy's horse, her face bruised but resolute, was Eliza. When she saw him, she urged her horse forward, closing the distance between them at a gallop. Zane dismounted just in time to catch her as she flung herself from the saddle into his arms. "You are alive," she sobbed against his chest. "When I heard the shooting, I thought." "I am here," he murmured into her hair, breathing in her scent, assuring himself of her solidity in his arms. "I promised I would catch up." She pulled back enough to look at his face, her hands touching him as if to confirm he was real and whole. "Hardin." "Dead," Zane said simply. "All of them except one who escaped. I had to make a choice." "You chose right," she said fiercely. "I told the sheriff everything. They will find the last one." The posse had reached them now, men dismounting with expressions of relief and congratulation. Sheriff Tanner approached, his weathered face solemn. Miss Kearney told us what happened, he said, and about Hardin, about Kansas. He extended his hand to Zane. You have done this territory a service, Abernathy. Those men will not hurt anyone else. Zane accepted the handshake, but his focus remained on Eliza. Now that immediate danger had passed, uncertainty crept in. She knew everything now, his past, his lies of omission, the danger his quest for vengeance had inadvertently brought to her door. The sheriff seemed to sense the need for privacy. We will make camp here, he announced to his men. Rest the horses before heading back to the canyon to recover the bodies. As the others moved away, Zane led Eliza to a fallen log beneath a pine tree. They sat side by side, the events of the past days hanging heavy between them. I should have told you about Sarah, he finally said, about what happened in Kansas, about why I came west. Eliza's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. Yes, you should have, but I understand why you did not. Grief makes its own rules. Hardin came to Willow Creek because of me, Zane continued, the guilt he had been carrying spilling forth. If I had not been tracking him, if I had not settled nearby. Stop, she interrupted firmly. Luke Hardin was a monster who made his own choices. What happened to your wife, to me, to Willow Creek, those are his crimes, not yours. Her absolution was more than he had dared hope for, but doubt lingered. When I thought he had hurt you, when I imagined losing you as I lost Sarah, I realized how selfish I had been to let myself care for you. Selfish, genuine confusion crossed her face. I told myself the frontier was no place for love, that attachment was vulnerability, but the truth was I was protecting myself from feeling that pain again, and in doing so, I put you at risk. Eliza shook her head, a surprising smile touching her battered face. Zane Abernathy, for an intelligent man, you can be remarkably dense. The unexpected response startled him. I do not understand. Love is not what makes us vulnerable, she explained patiently. It is what gives us strength to endure vulnerability that already exists. Without love, we are just alone with our fears. The simple wisdom of her words penetrated the armor he had built around his heart. 3 years of isolation had not protected him from pain, it had merely prevented healing. When they took me, Eliza continued, her voice softer, what kept me fighting was not just survival instinct, it was knowing you would come. Believing that somehow, what was growing between us mattered enough that you would find me. I would have searched forever, he admitted, the depth of his feeling overwhelming now that he allowed himself to acknowledge it. I know, she touched his face gently, that is why I love you. The words he had feared for so long now filled him with something like hope. After everything that has happened, knowing who I am and what I have done. I know exactly who you are, Zane Abernathy, she interrupted. A man who has suffered great loss but still found the courage to love again. That is not weakness, that is the greatest strength I know. In her eyes he saw not the judgment he had feared, but understanding and something more precious, acceptance of all that he was, broken pieces included. I love you, Eliza Kearney, he said, the words both terrifying and liberating. I think I have since you first looked at me across Harper's counter and saw right through me. Her smile illuminated the morning. I know. You were not particularly subtle, for a man determined to avoid attachment. Their laughter mingled in the mountain air, a sound of healing and promise. When he kissed her, it was gentle, mindful of her injuries but filled with the certainty that had been building since their first meeting. 1 month later, Harper's General Store reopened its doors. The new structure was larger than its predecessor, with expanded living quarters above the store and a small addition that housed Dr. Wilson's new clinic, a partnership that had emerged from the crisis. Harper himself, still recovering from his burns but improving daily, stood proudly at the door to greet the town's residents who had gathered for the occasion. Beside him, her arms supportively linked with his, stood Eliza, her face healed but bearing a small scar at her temple that she wore as a badge of courage. Zane watched from near the new counter, still marveling at the transformations of the past weeks. The final member of the Hardin gang had been captured trying to cross into Canada. The Rocking M had granted Zane a partnership stake in recognition of his actions, and most incredibly, Eliza had agreed to become his wife. The simple gold band on her finger caught the sunlight as she moved among the well-wishers. She had refused a fancy Eastern engagement ring, saying a frontier wife needed something practical that would not catch on ropes or saddles. A frontier wife, the concept still astonished him. Even more surprising was her insistence that they live in town rather than on the ranch, so she could continue helping her uncle with the store. A man can ride in from the ranch, she had reasoned. A woman cannot run a business from 20 miles away. Besides, uncle needs family close by. Her practical approach to their future together confirmed what he had learned during their ordeal, that she was far stronger and more suited to frontier life than he had initially given her credit for. As the celebration continued around him, Reverend Thomas approached, clasping his hand warmly. "All prepared for Saturday?" the minister asked. "The church will be full, from what I hear. First wedding we have had in Willow Creek in over a year." "As ready as a man can be," Zane replied honestly. The prospect of standing before the entire community, publicly claiming happiness after so much darkness, still felt surreal. "She is a remarkable woman," Thomas observed, following Zane's gaze to where Eliza was showing Mrs. Wilkins the new selection of fabrics. "Facing what she did, then choosing to rebuild here, it speaks to uncommon courage." "Uncommon everything," Zane agreed. The minister studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when you first came to Willow Creek, I worried for you. A man carrying that much pain alone rarely finds his way through it. But sometimes God sends exactly the person we need, exactly when we need them." Though not a religious man himself, Zane found wisdom in the observation. "I came west believing the frontier was no place for love, that survival here required isolation. She showed me that the opposite is true. The harshest environments are precisely where connection matters most," the Reverend nodded. "Alone, we are vulnerable. Together, we endure." The simple truth of this settled into Zane's heart as Eliza made her way back to his side, her smile brightening as their eyes met. "Uncle is tiring," she murmured, slipping her hand into his. "Would you help me get him upstairs to rest?" "Of course." As they assisted the recovering storekeeper to his new quarters, Harper grumbled good-naturedly about being fussed over. But when they reached his comfortable armchair by the window, he caught Zane's hand in a firm grip. "Never thought I would see my niece settle in Montana," the old man said. "Always figured she would go back east when she tired of frontier crudeness. Shows what I know." "She is stronger than any of us realized," Zane replied. "Not me," Harper contradicted with a wink. "I knew exactly how strong she was. It is why I sent for her after Martha passed. Needed someone with backbone to keep this place and me going." Eliza leaned down to kiss her uncle's weathered cheek. "And here I thought you were doing me a favor offering refuge after father died." "Mutual benefit," Harper chuckled. "Best kind of family arrangement." As they left the old man to his rest, Zane and Eliza stepped out onto the small balcony that overlooked Willow Creek's main street. The town spread before them, ordinary and extraordinary in its frontier determination. Businesses rebuilt after fire, people who had faced violence now returning to daily commerce, a community that endured despite the harsh realities of territorial life. "Is this truly what you want?" Zane asked, the question that had lingered despite her assurances. "A life here with me? You could still return to Boston, find something safer, more civilized." Eliza turned to him, the setting sun gilding her honey-blonde hair and illuminating the certainty in her eyes. "Zane Abernathy, when will you accept that I choose this life, choose you, with full knowledge of what it means? I did not come west seeking safety or civilization. I came seeking purpose and meaning." She gestured toward the town below. "I have found both here, along with something I never expected." "And what is that?" Her smile held all the promise of their shared future, a love worth building a life around. Even a frontier life. As he drew her into his arms, Zane finally allowed himself to believe in the happiness he had denied himself for so long. The frontier had taken much from him, but in this remarkable woman, it had given back more than he had ever thought possible. "Then let us build it," he murmured against her hair, "together." And in that moment, with the woman who had captured his heart secure in his embrace and their future stretching before them like the vast Montana sky, Zane Abernathy found what he had been seeking since the day he rode west, not forgetfulness or safety from pain, but the courage to love again in a land where such courage mattered most.